All right, everyone. Welcome to the Alive with Courage podcast. I am here with Mr. Darren Ho. Darren, I've met Darren. We've met a couple times over the last couple years, and Darren's a redemptive entrepreneur. He's the founder and managing director of the Restored Leader, and this is an Indiana-based professional coaching firm that's really dedicated to the formation and character of leaders and their businesses and their families. And
Mm.
Darren, like I said, I've got to spend time with you multiple times over the last year, and I think the way you occur to me that like from start to finish, like I'm just gonna give you some words, and I'm super curious, like how would you respond to this? But like I get off a call with you, and I experience you as joyful, grounded, clear, eager to give and serve, like really generous and strong, and those are a lot of big words, but I'm like, where did this come from? Like, and I'd love to just start with the formation journey of just how did you become this leader that you love to be living out in this season of life? So I thank you for being here first off, and I'd love to just get started hearing about your origin story.
Seth, it is such an honor to be doing something with you. So
Mm,
we have this like relationship. We were introduced by a common friend.
yeah.
We're all Southern Californians originally, though I live in the Midwest now. But to just be connected and do something together as
Mm,
men, and then as disciples, and then as entrepreneurs it just brings me such great joy. And then you're
yeah.
asking me about me. And so I just get to talk about me a bit, and as you know, in our profession, we don't talk about ourselves at all, uh,
Sure.
in session. So, um,
Yeah.
I'm just honored to be on this podcast. I also want you to know that I'm really working on receiving and
Mm,
celebrating myself rightly. And what I mean by that is, if you see me as what you just said, I am grateful that you experienced me that way. I hope that that's how I am with everyone I'm with, regardless of the context.
mm,
And you're encouraging me by giving me that feedback that that's what you experienced in me. And let's
yeah.
just like make it known. We've had like maybe 3 hours of conversation this
Totally.
in this
Yeah.
way. And so I would just say thanks be to God that He's created that type of this type of a person that you're experiencing, because I want to be received that way. And I'm
Mm.
not received that way, but I want to be received that way. So thank you. Thank you for having me on to actually share that. And that in itself is formational for me to say that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and gosh, how did that all come about? It is entirely by God calling me as one He loves.
Mm,
And I'll reference just right now, like Colossians 3:12. God chose me, and it's an election. He chose me not because like I worked for it.
mm,
He chose me to be a holy person set apart that He loves. So if I start and sit in that, just that first part of Colossians 3:12, I really have to just give Him all this wonder and behold, God, you chose me. I
mm.
think that brings a likelihood, a level of humility down to, well, then if I'm not a finished person you chose me to be, do the work to make you be known. And I know that sounds theological, but when you create a praxis or a way of living out your theology, that is exactly the journey I've been on. I've been
Mm,
always trying to create a praxis of how I believe God is God, His Son is His Son, and the Holy Spirit is available to us because of the Son's sacrifice, and mostly because God's character is, in fact, all about loving. And so embracing all that every day is a daily journey, and that's what I aim to practice every day.
yeah.
And so that's how I would answer your question at this point.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And so I'm just curious a little bit too about your origin story and even how you came to even want to practice. I would imagine there's all kinds of moments where, you're wrestling with, this is who God's made me to be, but I feel misaligned and maybe outside of that. And so this desire for a praxis or this desire for a way of living has been formed over time, I would imagine. So I'm just curious about some of your origin story moments
Sure.
and some of these formational pieces that like kind of created that statement that you just started with.
So I came to the Lord very late in life.
Mm,
It was in 2005 I began the journey, and that journey started on a fourth date with this really beautiful holy woman named Stephanie, who I eventually asked to marry me 2 years later.
wow.
Which then I received Christ in baptism, and before even that, I received Christ through making deals with Him that I could never fulfill on my end. And I came to baptism, 6 months before our marriage.
Mm,
And I just think it's important from the origin story, I start there all the time. It
yeah.
wasn't my birth in Thousand Oaks, California in 1976. It wasn't in the move to Michigan in 1989, and it wasn't in being a hardcore USC Trojan in that cult. I love Trojans, but, okay. In
Baseball.
94 to 98, it was 2005 to 7, the most formative times of trying to become, and make sense of being a man,
Mm,
and make sense of being a multi-ethnic Asian man,
mm,
make an American, whatever that means in all of this, and how to live out this thing, and I rubbed up against culture of America wanting me to become and live out a certain type of manhood. And I then met my wife and met Christ, and it was a very different trajectory.
mm,
So that's how it all started. And
mm,
then in the process of the next, I would say 12 years after marriage, my only focus was to learn to become this Christ-like husband.
mm,
And that was my only purpose. I was working as a W-2 at a large pharmaceutical company. That was fine. And I had ideas of how to bring this faith into work. But first, it was um, family life, weekend to remember, premarital counseling. By the way, I was baptized in New Song in Southern California. And
mm.
it was, what is a husband? And it changed my life to actually start the journey of role relationship that distinctly. Because as you know, working with leaders, there's a mishmash of roles we play. But I actually feel like the whole idea of truly um, pruning a praxis is to break things down to the simplest role.
Wow.
And so for me, it was disciple, and then it was husband. And I had no idea. I didn't
Mm,
have great examples. I have examples. I have good examples. And that's really a lot of the origin story of
mm.
starting out how to live out being a biblical husband.
That's crazy. I mean, I caught on to your, you believe in making things as simple as possible. I was like, wow. So husband was the thing you really grabbed onto for 12 years after you got married. It's funny because I think about my journey and, uh, I was thinking husband, I was thinking father, I was thinking employee, I was thinking, um, eventually was thinking entrepreneur, right? And so, it's interesting how your mind works in a way. w- I don't know. I'd like to hear more about that simplicity because it seems like a lot of what you do in the restored leader is really try to bring things into simplicity and help people
Very
live
much.
from very simple core values or core truth. And so that's a
That's right.
very, why do you, I mean, so I just talked about 5 different hats or balls that I was trying to juggle in a certain season. Why do you move towards that simplicity? What do you see that do?
Well, in sense making,
Hmm,
making sense of life,
hmm,
we bring our worldview. So as a Christ follower and a disciple of Christ, I look at my worldview through Christ. Well, I try to, but we're in the not fully perfect yet. So I also look at it as where I went to college, where I live in the state, in the city I'm at, the family of origin. There's so many different points of view. So I don't want to sound like, oh, he's only thinking about it through this lens of Jesus only. No, I have to think about it in terms of creation. And then I have to
mhm,
think about it as how to make sense of Christ and my faith within creation in the time I'm here.
Hmm.
Man, that seems very complex.
Hmm.
So what I want to get to is this idea that if I have a role, that role has a relationship. So if my role is husband or my role is disciple, I'm discipling or following or learning from Christ. Okay, the
Hmm.
Godhead. Now, if I'm then called to play the role of husband, I just have to ask the simple question: what is a husband? So if I'm working with a leader, the first question we go through, which is not like, overly heady or challenge or crazy, it's what is leadership? And what's interesting is that you can be a leader in any different type of role, but that leadership augments your role. And so before we can do any work, we need to know what leadership means. And people are like, "Is this literally what you do?" I said, "Yeah," because nobody comes in working with me knowing what their definition of leadership is. By the way, there isn't one. I'm not saying there is one. Actually, I'm saying the reason why we have work is because there isn't a clear, authentic, defined leadership definition that anyone can anchor on, but you can make sense of that. And so, as husband, I am a leader. And as a wife, my wife is also a leader of our family. And our family is the most important venture we will ever be called into.
Hmm.
So from the get go, I was very much formed in that type of thinking by my mentors, by seminary, which I eventually started about 4 years after I became close to the Lord. I
Hmm.
studied with Chuck Colson in his worldview, um, organization, and I had the pleasure of being shaped and formed by
Hmm.
worldview training from him. So there was so many things that I didn't choose that just God provided for me to walk into to really set the simplicity of let's look at our roles and let's look at what they mean and look at what the primary outcome of those roles. And very simply, marriage, the primary outcome is to pursue oneness with God and to become further set apart, but together. It's that triangle, right? You start on the end nodes, but to get oneness, you've got to move this way closer to God and you help each other do that. See, to me, that makes a lot of sense, which also works towards my wife is not my enemy. She's my partner and co leader of this family. And if we're on this thing called a family, a venture, a team, whatever you want to describe family as in its ideal place, it is to pursue oneness. And so that is so clear to me, and I feel like the world needs that simplicity amidst two different people who are very different, but have individual journeys, yet are come together in this mystical way.
Hmm.
So that's really why I think we need to break down the complex into role and into purpose in that role. And leadership is a great way to start.
Totally. So when you ask that question, what is leadership? You said you're not looking for like guess what the teacher's thinking here answer. You're actually curious what is their definition of leadership? Is that what you're after?
Yeah, for the last 8 years in founding and running the Restored Leader, we've had the same framework. It's a three-part framework, and it's worked. And I know it's worked because of not only the results people are experiencing, but what they're saying about who they're becoming.
Hmm.
And so the first one, and again, that question is one of 5 questions that have been curated to make up a story of leadership vision. And the
Hmm.
first question is, what is definition of leadership? Requires some thought. And what it is it's striking. So, Seth, um, have you ever thought about your definition of leadership?
Hmm. Yeah. I haven't actually, yeah, to sit in that for a second and just go, I mean, if I could come off the cuff, like it might take me a minute to kind of to actually birth it, but yeah, you're right. I
Yeah.
have. Yeah.
And yet it's nothing that I can tell you it is or should be.
Yeah.
I've not written a book. I mean, I have guidebooks, but I've not written a book about what I think it is.
Yeah.
And I actually keep that this way because everybody has to make sense of what this is, just like they have to make sense of who their savior is. And
Holy well,
here's the thing.
yeah.
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 Yeah, I
Well,
know.
I was
I
just
was
gonna
just gonna say, uh
sorry.
yes, go ahead.
Sorry.
Sorry, the delay.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was listening to a speaker talk this week, and he was talking about how, Jesus, he had so many different ways to invite people into an understanding of what the kingdom was. Like the kingdom is like a field. The kingdom is like a like and it really reminds me of what you're saying, where it's like, yeah, what is your definition of leadership? You got to figure out how it makes sense to you. So anyway, go ahead. But I was like, oh wow, that's a very interesting way that Jesus invited people into question to start making sense of this thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the difference is just that Jesus had a very particular, truthful answer that God gave him to reveal at the right time. In coaching and professional coaching, people are hiring me to help them become a more authentic, confident, and joyful leader. Well,
Yeah.
the first question I would have to ask is if that's the result of leading, then what is leadership? And then I'll ask, when have you written that down? Then I'll ask, when have you shared what you have written down? And 99.9% of the time, for 8 years, people say, I don't even think about it, and I don't even share it. I'm just the vice president of a company. I'm the
Yeah.
founder of a company. And so then what inevitably happens is, oh, so you're basically assuming that just because you have a title, you're a leader.
Hmm.
And that's, of course, you and I both know, not what real effective leadership has really little bit to do with your title.
Yeah.
It has much more to do with who you are.
Mm,
And that's where the character formation starts.
mm,
So as you go through the progression of those 5 questions, we've been able to just anchor in on a very authentic narrative that people are getting used to creating and co-creating in a point where it becomes really not a check the box, not a drop down, let me choose words. This is who I want to become. I want to be this type of leader. And we get to work on what changes they need to make to become that leader. That's great coaching opportunity right there.
mm.
None of these words are mine. They're just questions that are ours, which in many ways I model for all our leaders to model for their teams.
Yeah, so good.
So, yeah.
Well, what is the rescue in what you just talked about? Like, what is happening to a leader before they encounter those questions? What do you notice?
Um, we talk about the fact that you are under attack,
Mm.
and that attack is actually after your character, not your skill.
Hmm.
So, in the elements of, say, an executive who got a new promotion or has more burden on them because they've got a bigger job, they have more pressures to perform, as we say.
Mm.
What's really happening is your character is being tested, not your skill. Now, the world and generally your company would say otherwise.
Yeah. Wow.
You've got to delegate better. You've got to give better feedback. Oh, you've got to be harder on them. You've got to move faster. Sound familiar?
Yeah. You've got to hit these KPIs, whatever it is. Yeah.
Got to hit these KPIs. We don't have any time. You have to make it rain. Oh, um, yeah. Let me tell you all the things that aren't being done that you need to make sure you do. Um, these are the things that are just topically what everybody experiences. Is how does that make them feel?
Mm.
Well, oftentimes leaders that we work with feel like the internal narrative is I'm inadequate. Um, I I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do. For an entrepreneur, it's uh, can this product and service survive? Will I sell my company? Um, why do I have so many problems in scaling this company?
Mm.
And whenever we isolate the problem and its root, it's always relational, it's impasse driven, and it's oftentimes untethered, unagreed relationships. And
Mm.
here we go again. We go back to, well, what is a relationship that you want with your subordinate or with your boss? Who asks questions like that, Seth, in the workplace?
No one. Like, yeah. I mean.
Why they need a coach. This is why they've come, is
Yeah,
because they're realizing they need a space where there's no political ramification to
yeah,
explore what is in their heart about who they are becoming at work, who
yeah,
their culture is becoming by a team, uh, who their family is turning into. All of this requires a space of processing which is formative. And as
yeah.
long as we know the aim of which they want to become, then we can help them get there. And those are the types of people that generally come. And also, we have a lot of new leaders who level up, first time managing people, have a lot of experience doing the work, but have never been formally trained in any of the concepts of leadership and management, two separate things. And it's amazing to be able to help those young leaders because I really think about the next generation a lot in my season right now.
It's cool. Yeah, that's so good because so much of how you start in a workplace is taking direction and trying to perform and do a good job, and then it's like as soon as it starts flipping to you're leading, you're going to manage, now you're going to lead. It requires you to start asking yourself, well, I like the way you said, well, what is the relationship you want with your coworker or your subordinate, right? But that's also a vision question. Like, well, what's your vision for the relationship, right? And I think that starts actually calling on the creative, co-creating
Yeah.
mystery that God has invited us into, is to say, yeah, you and your unique identity, who you were put here in this position, you were given this role. What's your vision for how this relationship would look? Or what's your vision for how the culture of this company looks? So I love how you're inviting people to tap into that and to say, yeah, who is that person? But it sounds
That's
like
right.
so I've the way I've grown up in that space, or even in the coaching space, there is that you can have multiple, I guess, ways of being, or people that you like, beings that you draw on in order to like. I may be at one point, I may be one person as I step into a meeting that's a hard conversation, but then I might be another person as I step into a sales meeting. And some of that is you could call strategic, right? Where I'm shifting my way of being depending on whatever is required for the situation. Um, is there space for that in your model, or are you like, no, you're the same person there, over here, over there? Like, how do you reconcile that?
I love that question. You know what? This is probably the number one question I get in the beginning of a journey or when we're getting
Interesting.
a chemistry meeting,
Huh.
because probably 75 to 80% of the people have one paradigm of leadership,
Yeah.
which is I need a statement for every role I play.
Mm,
And then secondly, it's I need a core value for every role I play. And that's if we even get to the point of realizing that they're in a role and that they have a relationship, and that relationship is really the problem.
mm,
So it's because the other role that makes the relationship happen, there's no clarity on how this relationship should be for the benefit of each of the roles. Remember, there's no relationship without one role and another role. So I'll just start there by saying we believe very clearly, following the pattern of Jesus, that
mm,
there is one vision for leadership, a working definition that augments and guides the the way I show up. Now, the way I show up, which is really the core value that we protect at all costs, because
mm,
it's that unique to us and it's something already in us.
mm,
We just are not practicing being with it. And when
mm,
we're with it, it produces embodiments. And those embodiments are very much situational. For example, the way I lead my family is very much the same definition of which I lead my firm.
mm,
The way I'm a husband to my wife, very much the same core value, but ultimately, I'll embody that core differently with my wife than I will with somebody I'm coaching.
yeah, it's
So
good.
the simplicity is to keep leadership vision pretty much a working, growing, formative direction, but
Mm.
core value for a fully formed frontal lobe human being, pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And the embodiments, the imagination of how to show up with more imagination so that I am leading in a way that's contextual.
Yeah.
I would say the Blanchard companies do such a great job with situational leadership. It really kind of it was inspired by the Gospels. And really, Ken Blanchard does such a great job making the distinction of situational, diagnosing situational, and then leading situational. Well, I'll take that a bit further and say you can do all that, but if you have no clear definition of leadership, then you're only task oriented, not
Mm.
whole person oriented, which is a little bit of the flaw because a management system like situational leadership is for tasks. It's not necessarily whole person. So I think when you combine great work that's been done like that with the work of who are you?
Mm.
Whose are you?
Yeah.
How do you think of leadership? And what is the non negotiable, undeniable truth, your core value, a single core value that actually engines and feeds your leadership at work, home, and community? You are now operating in a simple and effective way
Mm.
that is undeniable.
Yeah. That's beautiful. So you talk a lot about so there's the discovery of that one core value, right? That just really anchors the whole leader. But you talk a lot about this process of protecting it, like the war you talked about earlier,
Yeah.
and then rest comes into this in a very like profound way. Talk about that, how, like because there you said there's the war, there's everything that's wanting to tear that off of the leader, and yet how do you hold on to that and grip that?
Okay, you've hit something. I think it's important to share the journey I've had with the second part of our process, right?
Yeah.
And the idea here is you redeem the core, you protect the core, and then you're able to live it.
Mm.
In our whole process, because we are a company that wants to invite everyone into what is truly effective leadership formation, is
Mm.
we make a very clear statement here that there's two words you're going to have to deal with in working with us, and they're Hebrew terms. And it's very interesting. I've never had pushback from this. Okay, we're
Mm.
70% probably Christians or adjacent, and about 30% not of the faith in our portfolio of business. And
Mm.
the two words are Shabbat and Manua. And the first one is biblically in the Old Testament, and the second one is actually oracally used in the time of Sabbath when they talk about the delighting of stopping. It's to
Mm.
delight or have joy in stopping. And Shabbat is stopping. They work with each other and it's colloquial. And of course, in oral tradition was used a lot.
Mm.
So we place these as the centerpiece of historical and theological truth, of which we say, what is rest? That's the second most important question after what is leadership? And we really believe, because if we follow the pattern of Jesus, that he clearly made sense of rest and he then had a praxis for rest.
Mm.
Very clear. So if you call yourself a particular person with a particular definition, and thus you have this truth, and that truth, let's just say, is anchored in scripture or something real,
Mm.
what do you make sense of rest? So,
Mm.
Seth, the number one problem in the world today is that we are duped as leaders in all contexts to think we cannot rest or we shouldn't rest. And yet
Mm.
that's exactly opposite. So we want to redeem and restore rest appropriately because out of rest is the overflow of your wholeness.
Mm.
Talk about going into the market with that message.
Yeah.
And listen, the first 3 years when we were overseas in Germany and we started the company, it was an American company, American LLC, but we were living abroad, which is
Mm.
part of the challenge of trying in my non-heart language. I was afraid of talking about this.
Yeah.
Yet I knew I have practiced it, our family practices it, and yet I knew nobody wanted to buy this. But God never ever said about whether or not someone would want to buy it or not. He said, "This is a part of what I'm giving you." So please talk about it.
Mm,
And it took me another 3 years when we got back here at COVID time after being overseas for 12 years. I realized this is exactly the difference between a restored leader and a leader.
mm,
And I just like I look, it's kind of like you've been always told this is the way, but you just kind of deny that it's the way. And this is my business, which is actually his business. And all of a sudden, we come to this point where I reconcile with him about 4 years in. That's halfway through. I have got to accelerate a leadership cohort that that we get to work with and really get into rest. So,
mm,
I'm so passionate about what rest means to somebody, and I'm also passionate about the spiritual formation that happens in rest. So that's actually why I went to seminary. I went to seminary to learn formation. I bring all those elements of the ancient formational Benedictine, St. Ignatius, but also new practices that help us rest holistically and
mm.
integrate that into the coaching journey. And man, it has been so rewarding and so challenging, but we know we're on the right path.
Dang. I just want to react to that honestly, like as I think about my relationship with rest, and it it's so interesting that you said it's been. I think you said it's. What did you say? It's been attacked, or it's been we've been duped. We've been duped. Yeah,
Yes, we've been duped. We've been
yeah,
duped by society and the
yeah,
organizations we work in, including our families, by the way.
yeah. And I would even say, that war you mentioned earlier, that war on our hearts. That's just whether it's society, culture, the enemy, whatever it is. But it yeah, as I'm sitting with that, I'm like, man, I have all kinds of agreements around like rest not being like my wife and my kids are like way better at rest than I am, and I'll even judge their rest, like this what the way he rests is not right,
Ah,
and
yeah, no.
I come from a long line of, grandpa's always tinkering in the backyard, and and those are forms of rest too, where you're, just raking leaves or whatever you're doing. But I guess I guess I'm just wondering, like, where do you see some of like the origin story of like society's common definition of rest and how they want to really move away from it? Like, how did we get here? Like, how did we get so duped into believing that rest is not for us, not productive, not um waste of time? Yeah, I mean, those are all the things that come to my mind when I start thinking of like actually getting myself good rest.
You're asking the question that I asked and researching the work so that when we positioned our guidebook to talk about protecting the core, we talked about everything you just asked about,
Yeah.
which is less about particulars of the way society has duped us, but more about we're working with first world people. And we're working with, we work with some non first world people, but
Uh-huh.
we're working with primarily a first world context. And as such, there is no real emphasis on stopping and delighting. Now,
Yeah.
what you do to rest does not matter as long as there's stopping and delighting.
Hmm.
And if you can't stop something that you need to stop to then delight in stopping, we have been duped about what really gives us rest. So we just need to revisit what rest means to us in a very deep way. And that's formative in itself.
Yeah.
And basically, business has created this, but the business of church has created this too. The business of seminary has created this too. And seminaries talk all about this, but they don't transform a praxis for a preacher to go onto the pulpit and actually preach it well, but actually live it. The elder boards don't necessarily say, hey, let's talk about your rhythms of retreat and work. This
Mm.
is not common stance. This is theological, and there's no praxis formed. And I think as a seminarian who's also a business person and has lived around the world, I can tell you this is the single most common thread in generally the first world. Because I've
Mhm.
lived in the first world in the three continents I lived in. I've not lived in the third world. But when I'm looking at the second and the third world, I'm telling you, I don't even know what the second world is, so I apologize. I just mean developing countries. Uh, you can kind of see necessity to work and necessity to rest. And yet here in the first world, where you have no needs, no real needs, why are we not resting well? Let me just give you an example of a blue chip company. When a blue chip company has stock that increases, when do you ever hear from the employees that we should rest more now since the gains have happened?
Mm,
Never,
yeah.
never. Instead, what happens, Seth?
Let's go again. Like
It's not
the,
enough.
the goalpost gets moved. Yeah.
So even in a financial planning context, we have to ask the question, how much is enough
Mm,
for your family? When we think about business, how much is enough? When we think about what makes us successful, how much is enough?
yeah.
Well, where do we get the most grounded, sober perspective of that? You need to be taken away and stop a certain way of thinking and doing, and you need to go to a place where you can appreciate it, maybe, and
Yeah.
then go deeper into how much is enough. What am I doing? How am I leading?
Well, the hesitancy that wants to come up in me about answering that question of how much is enough is and I don't live here all the time, but as we're human, we flip over into scarcity mindset, and you start believing that, well, if I give you a number and say this is enough for our family to live on, what if it's not enough like 2 years from now, or what if it's not, like it's just so interesting how the war is right there to just pull rest out of you, and pull peace out of you, and pull love and kindness and all these fruits that we're designed to live on. And it's like, well, I don't want to answer that question because it's
I
scary
know.
out there, right?
It
Like,
is scary. I am not no hypocrite here talking about our approach because I have to also live it.
yeah,
And I'm not gonna tell you that I have perfected it. What I will tell you is that I know when I'm engaged and I'm caring for my soul, I'm caring for those entrusted to me, it is
yeah,
through this approach. And this approach then shows me just how creative and how surprising God is to me in my life when I have
yeah,
to deal with what you just said. Gosh, there's a little anxiety. I don't know if we have enough, or I'm future oriented too much.
yeah.
And I think don't we need to have that sobriety? Because then when we get back into the pocket and delight in, I don't have to worry about the future.
Yeah.
Because in the past, oh my gosh, look at the last 10 years. Look
Yeah.
at what you've done.
It's
How can we not take time to do that? Well, we don't. Because we're too much in a duped world of you've got to produce. And I'll tell you, becoming a single owner with partners, not having to work in the W-2, working there for 19 years, there's such a stark difference when I go back and help W-2 workers. Um, and I have a heart for them. And at the same time, I also know God does and wants to transform them in their context. But boy, I tell you, there's a lot going against it.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Okay. So the rest. So you talked about a three-part process. There
Each
was
core, protecting it, living
yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah, the living it. So you use that word praxis a ton, right? And so if we're going to unpack that word praxis, how would you define it?
Well, it's just simply in English, and I believe it's a Latin-based term.
Yeah.
It's a way of living.
Yeah.
So in Germany, I lived there for 4 years. I mentioned that, and you'd always see on doctors their signs outside. It's the praxis medicine. It's
Hmm.
their way of practicing medicine.
Sure.
So, it is essentially a question we can use that translates now. I say a practice. The practice, though, is probably in multitude, a bundle of practices form a praxis, a
Hmm.
way. And from a biblical standpoint of view, um, when the ascetic movement happened and the monks happened and whatnot, they were choosing a way to be more in alignment with God's will. And I
Hmm.
think we can argue there's flaws to the way they chose and there's
Hmm.
limitations. In the way today, if we're talking about leadership and we're then entering first, whether in family or entering at the workplace, what is your praxis of leadership? And again, let's not be astonished. If we don't have a definition, we have no aim or vision, we don't know what is true about who we are as individuals becoming these type of leaders, we are not forming a praxis. And thus, what are we forming? Nothing.
Mm,
So rest gives us the sober opportunity to reflect on this by letting go, stopping, delighting in what's happened, and at the same time, maybe just kind of refueling another creative vision for
mm,
who we're becoming. Okay,
mm,
so uh, um, a praxis must be formed for any professional to live out the way they want to become. Y- In America, I can use a sports analogy. In
mm,
Europe and in China, I could not. It was just like, right? How pro do you want to be? Is all
mm,
I'm asking.
mm,
How good do you want to be, Seth, at coaching? How good do you want to be in
mm,
some of this work that you're doing to build your business? How good do you want to be a CEO? How good? And in
mm,
order to do that, you have to have vision plus a praxis. And
mm,
we believe that our approach helps people creatively build off of our base practices of character formation and competency formations
mm,
in the context of where you're at. And they
mm,
are simple. They're just hard to do alone.
mm,
Some require you to do these practices alone, but ultimately at 6 months in every time frame, about 6 months with our clients, we do a journey review and we're like, what is the praxis that you have formed? What are the
mm,
3 or 4 practices that help you form your character? What are the 1 or 2 that help you form the particular skill or competency that you wanted to become better at? And boy, if we can get people there, then
mm,
they've created with the Lord and through some help an authentic roadmap. Whether they
mm.
need us moving forward or not, I can't hold that tightly. I mean, certainly, I would love to. Most of our clients, we would love to keep on holding on to.
Yeah,
I have a 3-year vision for every client, and I don't share that right away because it may not be theirs, right? But I
yeah.
can sense, oh, 3 years of doing this could be transformative. So, so there's some thoughts there
Mm,
about praxis.
yeah. So you come back. So I would imagine once they get that base layer praxis, you could actually come back a year from now and go, wow, the practice has shifted or it's changing. I get a sense that the practice needs to shift based on, yeah. Yeah.
It has to because, my kids are 14, 12, and 10. They used to be 7, 6, and 4. And
Mm,
my life in the role of parent, father particularly, is not the same as it is right now. I'm actually really excited because I'm built really for this time, this middle school age time. I'm really built for it. And I hope I'm built for more. But from what I'm experiencing now, I'm really, I feel like I'm in the pocket of being the type of father of which I'm leading them
mm,
the way that is very aligned to my definition. I am fulfilling that through faithfully submitting um, and being indifferent and letting God shape them through me. And that's hard, but it's a practice.
mm,
And those practices are the same ones I offer as base practices to our clients. I'm in it too. I'm in the grind too, and I'm deceived. I'm constantly being deceived in areas of where I struggle mostly, and
mm,
I have to go back to my practice, and I have to adjust it to adjust to the deception. It
yeah.
used to be morning times I needed to stand firm. Now it's the transition between working and coaching. It's about 2:30 to 3 o'clock when I pick up the kids. And then it starts up again at 9. So I have to put them down in a way that's father focused in that role and then move and transition with practice to serving somebody sometimes at 9 p.m. So
Mm,
I tell you, I'm living it too. I'm doing it imperfectly, but because I've been doing it so long, a lot of the steps I've kind of I've kind of circumvent, but I am still forming a way of becoming.
yeah. Well, I think about some of the practices that and I don't have them formalized as you're talking about, but the practices that have really been life giving to me, like especially the last 2 years around paying really attention to the agreements and the deception, as you said, that wants to filter in, and then having a practice that helps me like basically break whatever those deceptions are and recenter on truth again. And it's been so life giving from a like just to come back to who God says I am versus what the deception is telling me I am,
Really good, Seth.
and I mean, and really just recovering my true identity, daily, multiple times a day, like when it gets lost and gets attacked, and so so that's something that it was the question. The reason I shared that story is because the practices could easily become just things I have to do that I end up now having a relationship that I avoid and don't want to do, or I'm just like, but I get the sense you're talking about really tailor-made practices that produce life, and so it's like I want to be in these practices because that's where life is. Um, the practice I just described is something that it's a life force for me. Like if I don't get into that practice, I'm a shell of the man that I long to be and that I know that I'm created to be. And it hurts. It hurts in business. It hurts in marriage. It hurts with kids. It hurts everywhere. So uh, I'm I guess I'm curious. Is the relationship with the practices like really an important thing that you guys help develop in the process?
Yes, it's just like, the ideal situation of Benedictine practices, Trappist practices
Mm,
of the ancient church, okay?
mm,
The purpose of the practice is towards holiness. It's the practice itself is not the holiness. It's the
yeah,
practice helping you become holy and
yeah,
and more set apart. What we mean is set apart as I'll evoke again Colossians 3:12. God chose you to be
yeah,
set apart. Okay. So that identity then if in the distracted world, in a duped world is always being etched at every day from the morning till night, then
yeah.
what keeps me holy? And that's the distinction of people of this faith, of our faith, the Christian faith. So practices need to be formed and shaped. So I just want to like make sure I'm making it clear. Um, the practice is a base. Practices are good for the moment and the season, and they need to evolve. And if we don't adjust that, what's going to happen is we become religious,
Yeah.
and then we think religion saves us.
Mm,
Here's a really good point. A good point of that. I have a client who has for years said, "Oh, I spend my morning time with the Lord at that table in that chair for the last 15 years.
mm,
I'm very proud of that." And I said, "Well, I love the fact that you have that practice. So, how has that helped serve who you want to become today?"
mm,
He's like, "I actually really haven't heard from the Lord very much sitting there doing that." And I'm like, "Oh, okay.
mm.
Well, why would you continue to do that then?" Well, because I think that's what he wants me to do. Now, did you hear just, okay, I haven't heard from the Lord, and yet I think he wants me to do that.
Yeah.
This is my whole point about having a conversation.
Mm,
Now I get to say to that person, just be present with what you just said to me about the logic of this in a relationship.
yeah.
And it was like, wow, we all have these blind spots. It's not intended. It's just we're a little bit duped to think that this comfort of a practice is going to keep us on a journey towards oneness or holiness or whatever that
Mm,
we're aiming to do. So being clear about the vision is good. Noticing that in the season, challenging the practices right now. And then we ultimately get to this thing called rule of life. What is a rule of life? Well, it simply is the boundaries that guard us, that help us freely be able to become who we want to become. And they change. Rule of life changes all the time. So rule of life form essentially a set of practices, which is a practice, a way of living. So I think
mm,
challenging each other in that context is so powerful. And when a client is able to say, "I want to become this leader. Here's my anchoring core truth," we get a lot of coaching opportunity there because we're not dealing with what I think or what you think as a coach. We're dealing with the client as a whole person.
mm,
And that's what I long for in all our work is that we help them redeem what is whole, true, protect it, and really, really over years see them transform and then teach that to their teams, their family, and whatnot.
mm. So
Yeah.
beautiful. Thank you for going through that process. It's such a I can tell it's come from so many different pieces and mosaics of your story and your heartbeat and how much you study and dive into the origins of it. And it's really cool to see how embodied it is in you, and then the passion that diffuses out of you to try to get it into other people and other leaders. So thanks for spending some time and unpacking it. It's really, really beautiful process.
Wow, what a pleasure. Thanks for letting me share so much of the work that we've been called to do and been given to steward. So
Mm, so beautiful. Thanks, Darren. Appreciate you.
thanks so much,
Yeah,
Seth.
yeah, man.